Hello and welcome to On the Payroll, my podcast about leadership, project management, Salesforce, consulting, delivering great projects with great teams, and all the topics that make up this big bunch of fascinating stuff. And in today's episode, I get the opportunity to speak to Paul Harris again. He's the CEO of Coacto, a Salesforce partner in the Cotswold. And on the first episode, we just focused on the professional side, and there was one bit about his life that I found really intriguing. And the great thing about having a podcast is, the agenda is up to me. I get to talk to whoever I want about whatever I want. I got an opportunity to talk to him about the musical side of, it's just a one-liner on his CV, on his LinkedIn profile, but we really dug deep into that, and that opened up a whole world of someone that you wouldn't know unless you ask these questions. And the reason why I like doing these podcasts is, even though there may be something about their past that doesn't sound Salesforce related or project related, it builds the picture of the person that is the one that we see in front of us. So I really enjoyed this one, and it may not be as value bomb heavy in terms of the more professional things that I normally do, but it was thoroughly enjoyable nonetheless. So I really hope that you will listen and that you like what you hear, because it is really fun. Enjoy. Hello, Paul. Welcome back to part 2 of my podcast on the payroll. I really enjoyed having you the first time around. How are you feeling today?
Really good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be talking to you again. I had such a fun time on the last podcast, and it really put an extra spring in my step, actually, when I was going home that evening and talking to my wife about the things that we discussed. It was really good. So thanks for having me back.
Fantastic. So the first time around, we didn't get to my favorite topics, which is about projects. So the focus of today a little bit is, I'd like you to tell me about some of the projects that you've had before. So let's just start with one. Tell me about the project that could be your favorite project, but the first project that pops into your mind that maybe brings a smile to your face and leaves you feeling like, oh, that was a fun one.
Yeah, so I've worked on a number of projects, and projects obviously stir different kinds of emotions depending on the organization, depending on the people you're working with, depending on the type of challenge that you face. But I think probably one of my favorite projects, and actually one that I learned on reflection probably the most from, was for a events management company. And I got a LinkedIn message one day from the CEO just saying, it just very brief, it said, "Do you do Salesforce?" That was it. Do you do Salesforce? So I wrote back and said, yeah, I can work with Salesforce. What is it you want to do? And so he wrote back with a few lines saying, look, well, we're just starting out. We'd like to get a system that helps us manage our events business, manages our weddings, our business engagements, and so on. And we want to take it from leads all the way through to the nurturing of those leads, to the event planning, the delivery of the events, and surveys and feedback and all that kind of thing. So, that sounds good. And it was, I'd been probably an independent for probably just a couple of years at that point. But the chap's quite insistent. I want you. I don't want teams of people. I want you to come in. I want you to sit with us. I want you to understand what we do. And I want you to build a system to support that. And it was kind of really cool because it was local to where I was living at the time. And actually, I think it's probably the only occasion I've been able to walk to work, which was just brilliant. So I used to walk in there. And because it was an events management venue, they had kitchens, and sometimes the chef would bring out food. And, there was lots of fun, young, engaging people working in the organisation, and there were some seasoned people as well, and it just had a really nice vibe. about the people. But the organization was in a really stressed situation. They were having challenges with delivering events. They had a few weddings that didn't quite go according to plan. So the CEO was in a very, very stressed state when I went in there. But it was only when I went in there that I learned that I was not the first Salesforce partner to go in and engage with these people, nor was I the second. I was actually the third. The other two had been shown the door. And it was at that point that I realized that I probably had more on my hands than I had imagined I was going to have on my hands. But I quickly learned that what had happened is those other organizations hadn't engaged with the challenge, they hadn't engaged with the people, and most importantly, they hadn't tried to understand the CEO's vision and what he wanted. And that's where I started out, was just to find out the lessons learned, find out the things that had gone wrong, find out what they needed. Most importantly was to find out what the CEO needed to get his business on track. And so I went through a number of discovery workshops, trying to piece together all these various pieces of the jigsaw puzzle as we do through some discovery. And I took the decision to sit in the office with all the event planners and the people that were running the business so I could hear the conversation, not because I wanted to earwig on what they were saying, it's because I wanted to learn about what they did, what the challenges were that they faced, how they did things. And that gave me a great insight. And what I was able to do was join up the view of the CEO with the staff. And I found that there was a huge disconnect. There was a big gap in the middle. And the two other partners had not done that. And therefore they hadn't had the left and the right hand talking to each other in the business. So over a period of probably 6 weeks, I think it took me to really get my head around everything that needed to be done. I then was landed with a challenge, and this is probably, I think it was around sort of November by this stage, and it was like middle of November. They said, "You are able to get a system in place before Christmas, aren't you?" And I said, "I can get something in place by Christmas, but I can't give you all of this by Christmas. This is a 3 to 4 month piece of work at least." At which point the CEO's jaw dropped onto the floor and he said, "Well, I can't wait that long, and I probably can't afford that." And so we then had an interesting conversation about how I was going to get them from where they were at to where they would like to get to, trying to align all of the various challenges, budget challenges, time challenges, staff challenges, and so on. And so I came up with a plan that said, look, I'm going to deliver things to you in bite-sized chunks. I didn't use the term agile. I didn't talk about managing projects. I said, look, let's just start out here with this leads piece and get all of that managed correctly so you can manage all the prospects coming into the business. And then I think what we should do is if somebody's interested and you want to quote for them, then we'll try to manage that piece for you. And then you've got some real challenges around the event planning and management and delivery piece. Let's take that piece next. And so I just broke it down into some bite-sized chunks. And I also asked him what he would need in order to get his finger on the pulse of the business, because I think there'd been some falling out happening between him and the staff. And I think that, there was, not only was the business stressed, but the relationships were stressed. And I almost became like a broker of peace between all the various factions in the business, because I was speaking to everybody, but they weren't all speaking to each other, or certainly not at the same time anyway. And so I managed just to try to bring everybody together. So my role became a facilitator. It became a mediator. It became somebody that was trying to create that holistic understanding, but then join together all of the various pieces that were just broken. And I realized that my task wasn't just to go in and understand what needed to be done, build it, deliver it, train them and leave. I became almost a confidant to the CEO, because the CEO had not connected with those previous partners. And he had a mistrust of Salesforce and a mistrust of Salesforce partners, as did the staff, who didn't want to go anywhere near a system that hadn't, failed not once but twice. So I spent a lot of time really with the people, building confidence, trying to set expectations, trying to create an understanding of the art of what was possible. And that in my hands, they vested this opportunity for me to deliver it to them, and I was going to do that. And then, once I'd spent some time working and discussing with that, I took a look at the Salesforce Walk and then realized that it was it's a bit like a builder's backyard. There was stuff everywhere, just everywhere. A lot of standard workflow had been written in Apex. There was Visualforce pages all over the place. They'd coded things when they could have got an app in, from the App Exchange, probably one that was free. And it was really difficult to really see what had been done and how it was working. And it didn't really align to the processes, and I could completely see why it wasn't working for them. So we had a conversation about that. And of course, bearing in mind, I said a few moments ago that we wanted it by Christmas. Here I am in mid-November, and I was faced with that, right, should I start from scratch? Or should I try to knock into shape what I've got? So that was a big decision, and I decided to try to knock into shape what they had, because trying to deliver something before Christmas in 4 weeks just wasn't going to be possible. Now, if I did that again, I probably would start from scratch, but that's a whole other story. But so I went on that path. I got them live with all the initial prospecting piece and the management of their customers. I gave them some extra stuff as well, so I just burned the candle a little bit and said, look here, so you can now manage these prospects, you can now manage the quoting and the opportunity piece. And so that gave them something before Christmas. And then when we came back from Christmas, they said, right, where's the event management piece? Can we have that by the end of January? And I said, there's a lot in the event management piece, particularly with the weddings and all the requirements and so on. I said, I think I said originally it was going to be March. I think it's going to be March. And they said, well, let's agree on February, shall we? And I said, well, I can agree on February, but I can't deliver everything that you want, so something has to give. So we had that conversation, and of course, those conversations can be a little tricky to manage sometimes. But, I sat down with the CEO on a one-on-one and said, based on my experience, I cannot deliver this. In the way that you want in that time frame. It's just not possible. But what I can do is all of this. Would that help? So I tried to get his buy-in to say, yeah, okay, that would work for me. And then the other things we can do in March, I said, yeah. So anyway, we got some agreement. I'm dramatically shortening the time frame for these conversations, obviously. But I realized by then that what had happened is they started to trust me. They started to have confidence in me. They started to see the value that Salesforce system could deliver, because I delivered a couple of small pieces. There were still some issues around some of the processes, and particularly the way the staff were using it. But then at the end of the project, when I came to deliver something just towards the end of March, first week in April, I think we crept into the first week of April because there was a little bit of scope creep. And they started using it, and my engagement with them ended at that point. And I felt I'd left them in a much better place, both from a technology perspective, from a systems perspective, from a process perspective, and I armed them with enough knowledge for them to manage the system moving forward. And so, that one sits really fondly, I think, in my mind, because it was a disaster when I walked in, and I left things, even if I just left things in a slightly better place, I'd have been happy, but I left things in a much, much better place, and got the business on track. And I was engaged to do some other things for the business. They asked me to help with some due diligence around some investment they were getting into the business. They asked me to put together some reports, for the investors, and it was a very interesting place, because I became that trusted advisor, and I worked with them for probably 2 to 3 years on and off after that, just refining and adapting the system to changes in their business. And so that leaves me with a real sense of pride and a sense of I did the right thing. I took a disaster and turned it into something that had actually yielded value. And I actually used that example actually for a couple of talks I did to the Salesforce community. I think I did one at London's Calling, I did one at Belfast.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So it became an opportunity for me to share knowledge with the community as well, not just how to do things.
Sorry, I'm trying to call me.
No problem.
Sorry.
That's all right, yes. So that particular experience became something I then wanted to share with the community, because there were lots of lessons to be learned in there about how to do things, also how not to do things, and how to rescue a project that had failed not once but twice. And so it was with great opportunity to share that with people, just to help them recognize some of the signs, recognize some of the very simple things. I didn't, it wasn't rocket science what I was doing. It was just making sure that there was good communication in place, expectations were set, timeframes were set, and what people needed to bring to the table was clearly understood, so that we could properly engage. And I think it's probably the only project I've done where the stakeholders came into the first meetings with a set of dashboards that they wanted to run their business by. So they were actually starting almost backwards. Not, we tend to build a system and then we do the reports and dashboards, in most cases. But they came with the dashboards and the reports first and said, these are all the things I want to manage and track. These are the things I want to measure. I want to have the heartbeat of the business right here. And I want this dashboard emailed to me every morning at 8 a.m. so that I know what I need to do in order to act on my business. And that was actually really, really insightful. This guy was a very successful business person. He knew exactly what his business needed, and he was able to articulate that really clearly. But obviously the folks that had been in there previously had completely missed all of that, because they built a rocket ship to go to the supermarket, and he didn't need a rocket ship.
So if I were to ask you, just to summarize all of that and say, what's the top 3 things you did that the other partners didn't do?
I think I listened to what they wanted. I wrote it down and I played it back to them. That was the first thing. I don't think that had been done. There wasn't a single piece of documentation or a single email that outlined what those previous 2 partners had done for this organization. Absolutely nothing. And the second thing was there was really a communication disconnect. They hadn't really communicated. They'd heard some things that had made them go off and write loads of code, but they hadn't really understood the requirements, because they hadn't discussed the requirements. They hadn't analyzed the requirements with the people that were going to use the system. And so when they said, oh, we need X, I would say, okay, well, what's that going to do for you? What problems is that going to solve? How's that going to work? What's the process? Who's going to do that? What does the customer need to see at that point? I was asking lots of probing questions just to try to understand that landscape, and that hadn't been done, by the previous partners. And I think the third thing was I'd engaged with them by going into their office and by sitting down and working alongside them. So I was there, and if something didn't work, or that they needed clarification on something, or I needed clarification on something, those people were right at hand. And that face-to-face contact, which we're starting to get now, coming back from the COVID lockdowns, I think that value should never ever be underestimated. It's great to have conversations like this. You're probably in London somewhere, I'm out in the Cotswolds. We can have this conversation, and we know each other. We've met a few times. That works. But when you're in a stressed situation with people leaving, weddings not going according to plan, business events being cancelled, staff not talking to each other, sometimes you just got to do the old-fashioned thing, which is to roll up your sleeves and sit down and talk to people face to face over a cup of tea. I bought a lot of biscuits during that engagement, and lots of cake. And I had lunch with lots of people, and it might have seemed on the face of it like it was a bit of a jolly, but it was a way of bringing them together and connecting with them, because the other partners had done the opposite. They'd actually alienated them. They'd tried to wow them with their technical wizardry and their understanding of the technology, but they'd actually pushed them away instead of engaging with them. So, I really strongly engaged with them. And I think to some extent, I also showed a bit of leadership as well, in trying to bring all these things together. That wasn't my job, and that wasn't part of the brief. But I think without that, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been successful. And particularly when you've got, say, the sales team that isn't talking to the event management team, because the sales team are setting all these events up, and the delivery team and the planning team is dropping some balls. That's going to cause friction. And so, I had to step into that, because I needed to understand what the handover was between sales and event management. And again, nobody had actually asked those questions. So, the one most important thing really was just communicate, talk to people, understand, listen, ask engaging, ask probing questions, ask uncomfortable questions sometimes, to get what you need to understand in order to help them move forward. It was, there was, over that 3 to 4 months that I was there, it was just, it signposted a lot of what I do now with Coacto, and a lot of what I do with my customers now. You should never forget the stakeholders. You should never assume that people understand technology. You should never assume that people actually want that new system, because they want to know what it's going to do for them. And so it was a real back to basics in terms of trying to get those people engaged, in the process, the technology, the rollout, the training, and the use of the system. So, yeah.
Amazing. So basically what you are saying, the core thing is communication and expectations of both sides. So I think you bring home the fact that this soft human skill is basically the most important, and the other two partners might have been the best at their technical wizardry and everything, but they failed to read the situation, right? They failed to communicate, empathize, and actually I think the first thing is they failed to listen. And you did all of that, and that's quite amazing for a success story. Now, if you can share with me maybe something that didn't go well, and how you managed that.
Yeah, so there was another project which I did for a very large pharmaceutical company. They were using very old on-premise systems running on specific server machines that weren't part of their data center, and they've been using spreadsheets, not just a few spreadsheets. I think they had 70, if I remember correctly, line of business spreadsheets that was managing, business critical processes. And this was a large and a complex project, but in an organization that was used to doing things its way, with its process. They were very much waterfall driven. They hadn't done any agile projects previously. They were going through an acquisition at the time. They were reducing headcount. They were upgrading key aspects of their systems architecture, and they were also doing an SAP implementation. And this was happening all at the same time. When you step back and look at that and think, there's going to be some challenges here with this particular organization, and there were. One of the first challenges was they didn't have enough resource internally to act as subject matter experts to convey to us what needed to be done, and they had some external people involved in gathering the requirements, which can certainly add a lot of value, but you need to join that together with people that really understand the business, really understand the processes, and understand what needs to be done. It was a very significant size project. I think 400 or 500 days of work were estimated for this, and we were putting together a custom ERP implementation integrated into their existing infrastructure that needed to take data from two systems that were probably 30 or 40 years old. It also needed to integrate with SAP. So we were dealing with lots of moving parts, but lots of dependent projects. And I think we did a really good job actually of building the system for them. But the real challenge was with everything that was taking place in the organization in terms of the political dynamics, the acquisition, and the loss of staff, it put the project in a very stressed situation. And most of those things were completely outside of our control. And we were probably 95% of the way through. We were in UAT. We've been in UAT for, I think, probably about 8 to 10 weeks. Then a new IT director came in. He shook things up, and he cancelled the project. 95% of the way through, and that was quite a shock, because it's like running a marathon and then deciding in the last 100 yards that actually you're running down the mile, you're just coming past Buckingham Palace and the finish line is just at the end of the mile, and you think, no, I'm going to stop here, I'm done. This wasn't right for me. I'm going to walk off into the park. And for them, they made a business decision, and it was a business decision. It wasn't because what we had built didn't work. It's not because we had done a bad job. It's because of everything else. And so, that's a very extreme example of where a very significant amount of money was invested in a project for it not to go live. And I kind of felt a little bit lost at that point, because I put my heart and soul into this project, along with a team of, I think I had 10 or 12 people working on that project with me. And to not make it over the finish line, you kind of feel like you've done all the training, you've run the race, but you're not allowed to finish it. And out of that also come, some similar kinds of learning, that you can't always second guess what the customer is going to do. And whilst you may not agree with the customer's decision is final, and they chose not to move forward with that. And it's was that project a failure? Well, it didn't go live, so in that sense, I guess it's not something that was actually delivered. But for me also, there was a huge amount of learning, that came out of that, particularly in terms of how you work with much, much larger organizations, where you may not have consistency of approach, you may not have consistency of opinion, and you're dealing with things, a lot of things actually, that are outside of your control. I think we changed the SAP interface. I think there were 8 revisions of that interface, because the SAP project was still in flight, and so they might change their architecture or change their mind in terms of how something was done, without recourse to what we were trying to do. So, okay, so we'll redo the APIs. We redid the API, and we got it all working, and then they changed something else because they'd done something else in SAP that had taken that project forward and realized that what they built, they couldn't do it in that way. They had to do it a different way, so they had to go back. So I think we did that, I think it was 8 times, and when you do something like that 8 times, you realize that actually you're not in control of a delivery always. But I think the important thing there is having the right kind of infrastructure to manage those communications, to manage those expectations, to get alignment. And I think in the client's case, it was, they didn't have a program manager that had an umbrella view of all of these things. They had different project managers, but there was no program manager. And I think that was a mistake, probably, because there wasn't one person that was pulling together the threads of all of those projects. And so maybe the IT director, for whatever reason, he decided not to proceed with that project. And I think other projects became a casualty as well. Sometimes there are some things you just can't second guess.
Absolutely. Now, allow me to apply a little bit more pressure, and you might have to dig a bit deeper to get this answer. But what I'm looking for is perhaps a mistake that you made that caused a project some big problems, in how you overcame that. So any mistake that you went, I shouldn't have done it this way, and the lessons from that.
Yeah, I think one of the projects, again, that we work with, we were implementing an ERP system, and this ERP system was replacing an existing Sage system, an ACPAC system, which was the then organisation's ERP and accounting system. They decided to use this particular ERP product, and they'd selected, or were in the process of selecting, an accounting package. Now, they wanted our advice on what accounting package to use. Now, that's not our bag. That's not something that we normally do. But it wasn't going to be a Salesforce-based accounting package. And so I said, look, I think you need to choose what's right for your business. You need to list out all of the things it needs to do, all of the behaviors. You need to look at the functions from your existing tool and make a choice based on what you think is right for you. And then we can align that ERP with that accounting system through some kind of integration. As it happened, the product they chose also worked with this ERP system. There was a connector, or so I was told. And so without validating the efficacy of that connector, I said, okay, I think we've got a solution for you. Now, I didn't evaluate the efficacy of that connector because I was told that that connector was in place and it worked. But as it happened, there was probably a proof of concept connector in place, but it wasn't ready for production. There were quite a few aspects of that connector that hadn't been properly thought through, they hadn't properly been architected, some of them hadn't even been implemented. And so we committed to doing the ERP, which is fine. We do lots of ERP work, and that went really well. But when we came to connect it to this accounting package, the connector really let us down. Now, because of the dynamic of the project, the connector was related to the ERP. There were some assumptions made probably on both sides that, well, the ERP works, the connector's going to work, but it didn't. And as a result of, I guess, doing the appropriate checks to make sure, maybe running a proof of concept on that project. And I think to caveat that, we were up against very ambitious timelines. The customer didn't want to renew with their existing provider. And the ERP took a little longer than we anticipated for reasons on their side and on our side. And so we ended up trying to compress this accounts connector implementation into a time frame that probably wasn't ideal, I think, and that's probably an underestimate there, with a connector that probably wasn't fit for purpose at that point in time. And we had to jump through huge amounts of hoops to get that working. We were challenged slightly because the vendor of that connector was probably not as responsive as they could have been. They didn't recognize that perhaps there were shortcomings in their connector that they really should jump on and address. So there were lots of aspects that just caused that then to become, it didn't become toxic, but it became a situation that really required very close management. And reflecting back, it consumed a huge amount of my time. I think we probably invested, I'd say, 200 to 300 hours in a project that was less in total than 200 to 300 hours to get everything working. So we lost money on that project for sure. But I'd made a commitment to the customer that I was going to get them live, and I stood behind that commitment and worked with them to make sure that we worked with the vendors to get the appropriate technical solution designed and architected, and then we could implement that connector. Because once the connector was ready, we then had to do some work to get the connector working with the finance package and with the ERP solution, and we did that. We managed to turn it around, but it was quite a challenging, very challenging experience. I remember this all happened because of timelines. I was away on holiday in Europe somewhere, and I was having to take daily calls morning and evening. I'd get up in the morning before my family got up, and I'd be on calls with some folks in the States, and then I'd have to have calls with the customer during the day. And my memory of that holiday, I went to a beautiful country. It was really lovely, had a great time. but my memory of that holiday is the work that I had to do trying to overcome this, this situation that had kind of gone off the rails. So now, we have a much more robust approach to evaluating potential solutions, potential connected technologies, potential apps. We always POC them beforehand, before making any commitments. We get the customer to POC them where they can, so that we have the information available to make a much more informed decision, rather than trusting someone else's judgment or somebody else's claims that, yes, this is going to work. So that was a really strong learning. But I think we had good management and leadership, I think, within the organisation to stand behind that commitment. But I think equally we had a very understanding customer. I mean, clearly they were unhappy with the fact that we were where we were, but they recognised our commitment, that we were going to sort it, and we would deliver what we said we were going to contractually deliver, and we did. And that organisation is still a customer of ours. So I feel that we did the right thing, even though it cost us.
I think what showed was the integrity that came through. A lot of customers really value that integrity, doing what you say you're going to do. And even though it sounded like you could have done maybe a bit more due diligence on the connector, but you had the reason why I'm saying that is I had a very similar kind of project where it was Salesforce and Commerce Cloud at that time. I think it was the first Commerce Cloud, really huge one, that Salesforce wanted implemented. And they just bought it. And, there were promises of connectors and things like that. And similar to yours, we had also the license was lapsing. And so we had a really tight deadline. And all sorts of fun and games. I also recall kind of like sleepless nights and worrying about things. And that wasn't in our control as well, because we weren't going to warranty the connector. That was not part of our job. So I totally relate. But just going back to your story, from the customer's point of view, it sounded like they had a partner who made a claim that they would help them implement these systems and integration done properly to go live, and you pull through. And I think for many organizations, having a partner that does what they say they're going to do is worth its weight in gold. So no wonder there's still a customer. So thank you for that story of the project that kind of went wrong, but turned out to be a really good result in the end. Now, before we close, I want to be mindful of your time because I made a mistake with the time slots. I'm really interested in hearing that little side thing you did in your career that had to do with music, because I love music. Yeah. Talk to me about that and whether that still features in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, it does actually. I developed a passion for music when I was very young, in my early teens. You connect with music because music's a great unifier. It brings people together. It's regardless of our skin color, language we speak, where we're from, culture, whatever, music is one of the few things that completely unifies. It's like food as well. And I got into music because I was working in I had a Saturday job working in a bicycle shop, and the chap there was a real music fan, and he'd be buying records and things every Saturday, and then he started lending me records, and I thought, this is great, I love this, and I started buying records. Still buy lots of records actually.
Well, let me stop you there. When you say records, what do you mean? Just for
records, gosh, vinyl. So 12-inch or 7-inch black vinyl discs is what was around when I was that age. And so it's got a real strong resurgence now actually. And I still buy vinyl on a regular basis, because for me there's no substitute for that. I find I do consume music digitally, of course. It's convenient, but there's no substitute for picking up a vinyl record with its lovely cover art, and there's notes and lyrics, and it's a very visceral thing, as well as listening to the music being very visceral. But I just got interested. I started going to lots of concerts and gigs. The same chap that introduced me to the records gave me a ticket for a concert. I think I was probably, I don't know, maybe 14, I think. 16 maybe, and I went to a concert, and I remember standing, he had bought seats A1 and A2. He was supposed to be taking a lady to this particular concert, but she declined his advances, and so I was like second best. I might as well take somebody who likes music, so I got to go along. I remember I was standing in front of the PA as a 16-year-old. It was a huge, great PA. I came out of the concert, I was deaf for 3 days. I couldn't hear for 3 days, but it just ignited more of a passion to get involved in music, which largely for me was going to shows and buying records and sharing it and swapping things with people. But later on in life, probably, I'm just trying to think, it's probably about 13, 14 years ago, I started a live music promotion company where you organise shows for artists. And the 80s is my thing. I mean, I was at university in the 80s, and so lots of early 80s electronic music is my fave thing, really. And I put on a show in my local town at the time, which was Cheltenham, for an artist called Howard Jones. And I contacted his manager and said, I'd really like Howard to play in my hometown. What do I have to do? And he sent me a contract, he sent me a list of requirements, and I thought, I think I could probably do this, actually. You had to make financial commitments to say that you have to make guaranteed payments to the artist if you don't sell any tickets and all that. And I thought, yeah, I really fancy doing this. It was a real challenge. So I did it. I sold out the show. It was fabulous. I got to introduce Howard on stage, which is amazing. And I got bitten by the bug of thinking, well, I can make all these things happen, and we can get lots of people come along that share that passion. And I got in contact with somebody who'd also done that recently for a show in his hometown of Barnsley. We got talking and were sharing hints and tips about how to organise our shows. And then as a result of that, we formed a partnership, and we did several tours with Howard Jones. We organised a few shows at the O2 in London even. We did a tour with Kajagoogoo. I did some stuff with an artist called Terry Oldfield. We did a show at the O2 with Haircut 100. And we did lots of this kind of stuff. And I started to move into those circles. I met most of the people whose posters were on my wall when I was a teenager, which was it was amazing. And I got quite close to some of these people that were people I saw on the TV on Top of the Pops. And but I was running a company at the time. It was very difficult to balance the two, and I couldn't quite make ends meet with the music stuff. It's really hard to make money from music unless you're an artist or a record company. So I decided reluctantly to let that go, but I still organise events from time to time. I do a lot of stuff with an artist called Mike Oldfield, and organising events for him, and not for him, but about his music and get people together. And this culminated actually a couple of years ago. I made a documentary with one of my musician friends about the start of Richard Branson's Virgin Records. So we got to interview all of the people, or a lot of the people that started that business, back in the early 70s. And it was incredible. It was just a little side project. It kind of took over my life for a while. But there is a DVD, and we re-recorded Tubular Bells as well with lots of well-known artists, and we released it, and we sold a ton of them. But the icing on the cake was one day getting a message from Richard Branson. It popped into my inbox, and I said, "From Richard Branson," and I thought, somebody's having a joke here. But it was from him, and he'd seen what we were doing, and he was interested in what we'd filmed. He wanted a copy of it. He was potentially interested maybe in using some of the footage, in his own life story, which is quite remarkable. So to go from small vinyl beginnings, in my teens, to having a conversation with Richard Branson about a documentary that I've made with a friend of mine was kind of like the icing on the cake, really. it still fuels a lot of passion with me. I still, listen to music every day, loads of music in the car, I have music in the office. I've got a little, one of our rooms is dedicated to that little music corner. I've got hundreds, thousands of items, much to my wife's, I think I take up too much space in the house. But, that's just part of me. That's part of my identity. I mean, I did some stuff with Mike Oldfield. I got to write some sleeve notes for some releases. I got to create some proposals for putting on shows, and I've done lots of things that are. It's kind of like you'd never believe that would happen. And I look back on it now and think, wow, you have a wow moment. So you have to pinch yourself and think, did that really happen? That really happened. So it's a fabulous thing. But for me now, it's about getting people together, sharing that passion, creating a good time for people, and just sharing that understanding, because that's what brings us together. Shared understanding, shared passions brings people together. So for me now, it's as much about the music as it is about bringing people together.
What an amazing story, Paul. I had no idea how such a little few lines on your LinkedIn profile hit such an amazing and fascinating story, especially about okay, having an email from Richard Branson is cool, but what impressed me more was the fact that you saw something about wanting to have an artist perform in your town. You thought, I can do that. And then how old were you then?
Oh gosh, I was probably, I was in my mid 40s, I think, probably. So
from doing IT and then thinking, ooh, why don't I organize this concert thing and get somebody I admire to come and perform? It just seems like such a big jump in my head. It's not something I would think, ooh, let's organize this amazing thing and then have that morph into, helping create amazing events at the O2, and then your documentary, and then meeting people along the way that you admired, that's on posters, and contributing in their musical project and being part of musical history. If you're saying things like, writing things on the album sleeves, and that's just it just blows my mind away. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for sharing that story and the other project stories, because it's been quite fun. And I'm apologizing again for mixing the slots around, but
no problem.
I have enjoyed this very much. At some point, maybe we'll do another one later on when you've got more stories to tell, because you are a natural storyteller. I just didn't interrupt you because I was just brought along to you in your story. Thank you very much.
Very kind of you to say that. I enjoy telling stories. I think what we do as consultants often is telling stories. We're telling stories to people about things we've done to get them to adopt technology, or we're telling stories to help people understand something. And actually, telling stories is something that goes back, right to the early days of our civilization, because that's how we used to share knowledge and pass knowledge on from one generation to the next, is sharing of stories. It's a very deep-rooted core capability of who we are and what we do.
I don't think it's just passing info. I think it's connection as well. I think telling stories create connections, and I am really grateful to have you in my network and my connection. And I look forward to the day when we're actually meeting face to face, because I don't think we've actually done that.
No, we haven't. Maybe London's calling later this year if you're going.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. That would be great. Okay. On that note, thank you so much again, Paul, for another wonderful episode of the podcast.
Thank you, Pei. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.